All right, so here we're starting our notes for 7.5. So again, continuing with rational expressions. We've simplified them, multiplied them, divided them. In the last section, we added and subtracted them where we had to get them over the common denominator. And now we're going to put them into an equation. To get us ready for story problems is actually what it's doing. So here are the steps that you want to follow when you are solving an equation containing rational expressions. You're going to take and you're going to find the lowest common denominator of all of the rational expressions on either side of the equation, and then we're going to multiply everything in that equation through by that lowest common denominator over 1. And what this is going to do is it is going to eliminate the fractions for us. Once we are done eliminating the fractions, then we'll of course go on and use all of our steps that we know for solving equations, remove the grouping symbols using distribution, and then solving the resulting equation. Okay, so let's start with something fairly simple, the first couple of questions here. So we want to eliminate the fractions, and we're going to do that by multiplying everything through by the lowest common denominator. So if I look at all of the denominators, 4, 5, and 20, hopefully you see that the lowest common denominator is going to be 20. So now here's what you're going to do with that 20, and it's very different than what you do when you're actually adding or subtracting rational expressions like we were in the last section. We are going to take every term of this equation and we are going to multiply it by the lowest common denominator over 1. So I take x over 4 and I multiply it by 20 over 1, plus 4 over 5, and I'm going to multiply it by 20 over 1, equals 1 over 20, and I'm going to multiply that also by 20 over 1. So multiply every single term by the lowest common denominator over 1. Now we're actually going to do these multiplications. So look at what happens here. This 4 cancels into this 20, leaving me with 5. So this first term is now simply 5x plus this 5 will cancel into the 20, leaving me with 4, and 4 times 4 is 16, is equal to, over on the right-hand side, the 20s disappear, and I end up with simply a 1. Voila, no fractions. And that is your goal, is to eliminate all the fractions, and then you can go ahead and you can solve. So now, what are we going to do? Well, we're simply going to gather everything with an x to one side and everything without an x to the other side. So I just subtracted 16 from both sides, and then dividing both sides by 5, I'm going to get x is equal to negative 3. So that is the process that you're going to go through for every single rational equation. So let's go ahead now and let's do B. So look at all the denominators, 3, 5, and 15. I think we can all agree that the lowest common denominator is going to be 15. So we're going to take, now in every single term of the equation, we're going to multiply by 15 over 1. So x plus 2 over 3 times 15 over 1. Minus x minus 1 over 5 times 15 over 1 equals 1 over 15 times 15 over 1. And when you do the multiplication and the canceling now, all your fractions should disappear. So let's see what happens in this first term. So the 3 will cancel into the 15, leaving me with 5. So I'm left with 5 times x plus 2. Minus. Here, the 5 will cancel into the 15, leaving me with 3. So I'm left with 3 times x minus 1 is equal to, over here, the 15s cancel, and I'm simply left with a 1. All the fractions are gone. So let's go ahead and let's solve this equation so you know we're going to distribute. So we're going to have 5x plus 10 minus 3x, watch your signs, plus 3 is equal to 1. Let's combine our like terms on the left-hand side. Combining, we're going to end up with 2x plus 13 is equal to 1. Let's subtract 13 from both sides of my equal sign, giving me 2x is equal to negative 12. And if I quick go up here, when I divide both sides by 2, you can see I get x is equal to negative 6. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's do the same thing for C. Well, remember all of these terms are really simply over 1. So what is the lowest common denominator of all of the terms? Well, the lowest common denominator is simply x. So I'm going to multiply every single term by x over 1. So 2 over 1 times x over 1 plus 6 over x times x over 1 equals x over 1 times x over 1 plus 7 over 1 times x over 1. I know that's a lot of ones, but that's okay. So as you can see here, this originally wasn't a fraction, so nothing is going to cancel. We're simply going to be left with 2x in that first term. Plus, here the x's cancel, and we're left with 6 times 1 or 6 is equal to, on the right-hand side, nothing cancels, and we have x times x, which is x squared, plus second term, again, nothing cancels, and we're left with simply 7x. So now look at this equation we're left with. It's a quadratic equation. We solved those in chapter 6. So remember, it's quadratic because it has an x squared. And what do I do to solve a quadratic equation? You want to set it equal to 0 so that you can factor. So let's go ahead. I'm going to set it equal to 0 by getting everything on this side because I like my x squared positive. So I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. And I'm also going to subtract 6. So on the left-hand side, as you can see, I'm going to end up with 0 is equal to x squared, 7x minus 2x is plus 5x, and then minus 6. Let's go ahead and factor. So it's a trinomial, so we're going to backwards FOIL. We have an x and we have an x. And we need to know what multiplies together to get negative 6 and adds together to get a positive 5. Well, that has to be a positive 6 and a negative 1. And now if I go ahead and if I take each of my factors and set it equal to 0, because that's what you do to end solving a quadratic equation, here we'd subtract 6 from both sides to get an answer of x equals negative 6. And here we'd add 1 to both sides, giving me an answer of x equals positive 1. So there's something else that can possibly happen is you could end up having to factor at the end. It all depends on what kind of equation you are faced with once you go ahead and you eliminate the fractions. Okay, so again, this is over 1 and the 2 is over a 1. If I look at all the fractions, what's my lowest common denominator? Hopefully you see that it's just x plus 3. So now we have to go ahead and we are going to multiply every term by x plus 3 over 1. So minus 6 over x plus 3 times x plus 3 over 1 equals 2x over x plus 3 times x plus 3 over 1. And finally, plus 2 over 1 times x plus 3 over 1. That one got to be kind of long. But it all looks better after you cancel out all of the fractions. So again here, because you both have 1s on the bottom, nothing's going to cancel, and we're simply going to be left with x times x plus 3. I'll distribute that in a minute. Minus, here the x plus 3's cancel, and we're left with just the 6 is equal to x plus 3's cancel again, and you're left with simply 2x plus, here nothing cancels, and you're left with 2 times x plus 3. It looks so much better. Why don't you guys go ahead, pause the video, and solve this equation. Come up with your answers. Notice how I mentioned answers, that's plural. And then come back and watch me do it, and we'll make sure that we did it in the same way. All right, so here we go. We're going to distribute x squared plus 3x minus 6 equals 2x plus 2x plus 6. I see some like terms on the right-hand side. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take and I'm going to combine the 2x and the 2x. Now, because it's quadratic with the x squared, I'm going to bring everything over to the left-hand side and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides, and I'm also going to subtract 6. So I'm going to end up with x squared. 3x minus 4x is minus x. A negative 6 minus 6 is negative 12 is equal to 0. Let's go ahead and factor backwards FOIL because it's a trinomial. We have x and we have x. We need to know what two numbers multiply together to get negative 12. Add together to get negative 1. What are they? They are negative 4 and positive 3. If I take each one of these and set it equal to 0, to go ahead and solve, here, when I add 4 to both sides, I'm going to get x equals 4. And here, when I subtract 3 from both sides of my equal sign, I'm going to get x equals negative 3. Now, this brings up a point that we have not discussed yet because it really hasn't come up. But you know how when you solve an equation, you can always check to make sure you have the correct answer. Now, these equations are kind of intricate, so you don't want to do that for every one. So I'm going to tell you when a solution will not check. The only time a solution will not check is if you go up into the original equation, and if when you place that solution into the denominator, you end up with a 0, because of course we all know you can't have 0 in the denominator of a fraction. So one of my solutions that I got down below was negative 3. Do you see that if I were to plug in a negative 3 to this denominator, that would give me a 0? And since you can't divide by 0, we're going to take that solution and we're going to toss it. So you really only get one solution for this equation, and that solution is a positive 4.